What is up, Dynasty Leaguers? Welcome back to another DLF YouTube channel video. Today we're going to do another versus episode. I pulled two players from our newly developed July startup ADP that are going neck and neck in that ADP. Last time I did this, we did this on two sophomore wide receivers in Jerry Jeudy and Chase Claypool. So if you missed that, go check it out. But today we're going to be going to the running back position, and we're actually looking at a couple veterans here between Aaron Jones and Austin Ekeler. I think this one's going to be really good, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this at the end of this to see who you guys would choose between these two players. Let's get right into the video. So like I said, we're going to be doing kind of a versus episode here between two veteran running backs in Aaron Jones and Austin Ekeler going neck and neck in July DLF ADP. It's very interesting too because both players are currently 26 years old. Both are valued pretty similarly, like I said, going in the late second round of one quarterback startup drafts. Both actually finished as top 5 running backs in 2019. So both have very high and very similar upside and ceilings, but both are two different players completely. They win differently, they score fantasy points differently. So let's start breaking down each player individually and see if we can create some separation here to ultimately crown a winner. So let's start with the first one. We can start with Austin Ekeler. He is the more valued of the two, so to say, going as RB14, 23rd overall in one quarterback drafts. And Ekeler has been really good to elite over the past 3 years. In 2018, he had 145 touches for 958 yards and 6 touchdowns, finishing as the RB25. In 2019, which was his big breakout year, 224 touches, 1,550 yards, and 11 touchdowns. He finished as the RB4 that year. And I mean, he was basically a wide receiver then. He had 108 targets, 92 receptions, almost 1,000 receiving yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns versus only a 132 for 557 and 3 rushing line. So the receiving is really what makes him so valuable for fantasy football and what we really love to see from our running backs. And that continued a lot in 2020 as well. Even though he only played in 10 games last year, he still had 170 touches for 933 yards and 3 total touchdowns, finishing as the RB26. But I will say, to his credit, he was the RB12 in points per game with 16.5 fantasy points per game. And what was great about 2020 was that his rushing workload actually increased over a 16-game pace to 186 to 190 carries over 16 games, which was about 4 more carries per game than what he got in his breakout year in 2019. Meanwhile, his receiving volume actually stayed the same. It was very similar in terms of his total target share in the LA Chargers offense. And I mean, if you look at his games and look at his target log, when Justin Herbert took over, he took over in week 2 against the Chiefs. Austin Ekeler had 4 targets that game. That's fine. It was Herbert's first game in the NFL. Week 3, though, he had 11 targets. Week 4, he got hurt in the first quarter, then missed 6 games. But his first game back in week 12, he had 16 targets. Week 13, he had 9. Week 14, he had 9. And then again in week 17, he had 7. So you can see he has a monstrous workload and target share in this LA Chargers offense with Justin Herbert. And that's one of the things that I love so much about Austin Ekeler and his prospects moving forward with Justin Herbert in this LA Chargers offense. And because of this receiving volume and his receiving floor, Ekeler is uber consistent on a weekly basis. I mean, in 26 games since 2019, here's his fantasy finish breakdown. He's been a top 5 running back 7 times, top 12 9 times, top 25 18 times. I mean, 79% of his games since 2019 have been RB2 or better. And that's a better percentage than guys like Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, Joe Mixon. It's fantastic output, and it's such consistency that you love to have from your running back that he is never really going to kill you. And I mean, ultimately, he's only really had 2 bad games outside of the top 40 at the running back position since 2019. The first one was in week 6, 2019. He had 5.8 points against the Steelers. Honestly, that entire Chargers team was really bad. Melvin Gordon was just as bad. You only really wanted Hunter Henry because he scored twice. But that whole entire Chargers team was really bad in that week against the Steelers. And then, of course, last year, week 4, 2020, had a really bad hamstring injury in the first quarter that then eventually put him on injured reserve, and he missed 6 games last year. Those are the only 2 weeks in the past 2 years where Austin Ekeler has been outside the top 40 at the running back position on a weekly basis. The big thing with Ekeler, and honestly 26-year-old running backs in general, just for Dynasty, is their contract and their future situation as well, because that age really creeps up on them. They start losing value in Dynasty. But what does their contract really say about them sticking in their situation and moving forward down the road? He's actually 1 year into a very cheap 4-year contract, so he will be a Charger obviously for 2021 and then again for 2022. He can be cut in 2023, but that only really saves them about $6 million when he is 28 years old. So that's entirely a whole different conversation a couple years down the road. But that at least gives you 2 great years for sure with the LA Chargers. That gives them all the positives of being in that offense, being a focal point for that offense, and then of course it being led by a fantastic young quarterback in Justin Herbert. So Austin Ekeler's phenomenal. I love getting him at his RB14 price, and I think that he is absolutely fantastic for 2021 and 2022. Before I get to Aaron Jones and talk about him, I would like to ask if you have been finding value from this video to please smash that like button and help this video go and be found by more people. I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you so much for that like. So we can talk about Aaron Jones now. The RB15 in July DLF ADP, going 24th overall in one quarterback startups. Like Austin Ekeler, Aaron Jones has been very good to elite over the past 3 years. In 2018, he had 159 touches for 934 yards and 9 touchdowns, finishing as the RB24. 2019, just like Austin Ekeler, had a monster breakout year, 236 carries, 1,084 yards, and 16 touchdowns, while also adding 49 for 474 and 3 on 68 targets through the air, finishing that year as the RB2 overall behind Christian McCaffrey. And then 2020, last year, in 14 games, he had 201 carries, 1,100 yards, and 9 touchdowns, while also having a very similar receiving stat line of 57 for 355 and 2 on 63 targets, finishing last year as the RB5. And he is actually one of only 2 running backs, him and Derrick Henry, who have finished top 5 at the running back position at the end of the year in both 2019 and 2020. So unreal production from Aaron Jones over the past 2 years that I feel like goes largely unnoticed throughout the entire community of how good Aaron Jones has actually been for fantasy football. Unlike Ekeler, though, Jones is much more of a prototypical running back. He accumulates a lot of carries, and while he still has a very solid receiving floor, it's basically about half or even less than half of what Austin Ekeler has been doing over the past couple years. But he's definitely beating him in terms of volume on the ground. And so that's really where the biggest difference is between Aaron Jones and Austin Ekeler in terms of how they win and how they score fantasy points. But the real question for Aaron Jones is Aaron Rodgers, to be honest with you. But I'm going to be, again, completely honest here. I don't care if it's Aaron Rodgers or Jordan Love.
We don't care.
Let me tell you. He is going to be good regardless of that. The Packers only realistically have 2 weapons on their team, Davante Adams and Aaron Jones. I don't want to hear anything else about any of their other wide receivers. Tunyon is fine, but it's ultimately, this is an offense for Davante Adams and Aaron Jones. Jamal Williams is gone. He was utilized a lot on 3rd downs and on 2-minute drills because of his blocking. He stole over 30 receptions in each of the past 2 years from Aaron Jones. So Williams being gone could lead to an increase in receiving volume for Aaron Jones, as he fits much more of that receiving running back type of mold, much more than A.J. Dillon does. So that could get Jones on the field more for 3rd downs and for those 2-minute drills as well, which could lead to more receptions and obviously more fantasy points. So no matter who is the quarterback between Rodgers or Jordan Love, Jones should still get 250 plus touches in this offense with either quarterback. It's still Matt LaFleur. It's still his offense. He's still controlling and calling plays. Maybe he doesn't score as many touchdowns with Jordan Love versus Rodgers, but Love is a complete unknown right now. And as many people think that he is going to be bad, he could also just as well be, fine or a solid quarterback and still get enough for Aaron Jones to produce and still be enough for Aaron Jones to produce as an RB1, as a top 12 fantasy running back. So looking at Aaron Jones's contract, he just signed a massive 4-year, $48 million deal back in the spring during this offseason. Realistically, though, looking at it, it's much more of a 2-year deal because it becomes team-friendly after 2022. So like Ekeler, we can basically guarantee 2 more years in this Green Bay Packers offense for Aaron Jones. After that, it gets much more dicey. But then again, we're talking about both of these running backs in their age 28, 29 seasons at that point. So that's a much different conversation for Dynasty. So now comes the big question. I mean, who would you take? Who would you take between Austin Ekeler and Aaron Jones? To me, my answer is Austin Ekeler. Man, I love Aaron Jones. I've been on him since his rookie year in 2017 in that pre-draft process before he even got drafted by the Packers. I have loved Aaron Jones so much coming into the NFL and what he's been doing as an NFL running back, and obviously all the production that he's been giving us the past 2 years. But I like Austin Ekeler just that much more. I think that the offense and situation is just slightly better in LA. I like how Ekeler scores through receiving for fantasy points. I think ultimately that receiving breakdown versus his receiving and rushing compared to Aaron Jones could help prevent injuries more down the road. Yeah, I know that Austin Ekeler missed 6 games. He's been more hurt technically in terms of games missed over the past 2 years than Aaron Jones. But that receiving workload and ability is really what helps extend players' careers. You look at guys like Alvin Kamara and stuff like that who just continue to extend their career because a lot of their workload is coming through the receiving game much more than the rushing game where they're running in between the tackles and potentially getting hurt. That's not Austin Ekeler so much. So I think that helps down the road in terms of preventing more injuries versus Aaron Jones. Not to mention the fact that Austin Ekeler has a slightly better contract, in my opinion. He has a higher chance for him to stay with his team through that third year through 2023. We talked about how they both can basically be guaranteed for 2 more years in their offenses. I think Austin Ekeler has a slightly better chance of being on his team in LA through 2023. But again, he'll be 28 years old. That's an entirely different conversation for Dynasty. But as of right now, I'm really curious onto who you guys would rather have. Who do you want on your Dynasty roster? Who are you drafting first? Who would you rather trade for more? Austin Ekeler or Aaron Jones? My answer was Austin Ekeler, but I'd love to hear from you guys. So leave that comment down in the comment section and tell me who you would rather have between Austin Ekeler and Aaron Jones in Dynasty. If you want a little bit more running back content as well too, you can click on this video right here. And I talk about and run down and describe what it takes for a running back to be a top 5 fantasy running back. And with that all being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching. We'll catch y'all later.